Hi, I'm Mike Boyce. I'm the chairman of the county. I'm back again for another one of the weekly videos. And this week, like I promised you last week, I'm going to give you the presentation that I've been giving for the last 3 nights at the town halls. This is the video that talks about how we got here and where I'm trying to go with this millage rate. But first, I'd like to start out with a video that Ross Cavett has put together that talks about your tax bill. So with that, take a look.
Here are 4 things you may not know about your property tax bill. For those younger than 62 years old, on average, more than 70% of your bill goes to the Cobb County School District. Cobb County's general fund is a distant second. Then a sliver of the payment goes to the Parks Fund, followed by the Fire Fund. In fact, the percentage of Cobb County property tax bills that goes to the county's general fund in recent years has declined from about 19% of your bill in 2012 to about 12.7% last year. That's primarily because of the floating homestead exemption. If you live in your primary home, you likely have the homestead exemption listed on your tax bill. What many people don't know is that Cobb has a floating homestead exemption, which means as the value of your home goes up, the floating exemption keeps the rate at which you pay into the county general fund frozen at the level at which you bought your home or at least applied for the exemption. Here's what that looks like. We picked a random longtime Cobb County resident. We'll call him Mike. Mike's house has been reassessed to a value more than twice the amount it was 15 years ago, but yet he pays the county general fund less money than he did in 2002. When I looked at my own property tax bill, I found my home's assessment is up 11% over the past 5 years, but I contributed $40 less to the general fund than in 2013. Remember, this affects only the county's general fund. The tax assessor says 52% of all residential properties in Cobb have that floating exemption, which last year saved taxpayers but cost the county's general fund more than $23 million. Our finance director calculates after taking into account a predicted increase, the county can expect a boost in the neighborhood of $6 million in the general fund if the tax assessor's prediction comes true. Next, the Brave Stadium. The general fund is one of 5 sources of funding for the project. The Cumberland Special Services District, where businesses in the area tax themselves. The Special Services District 2, the already formed $3 a night hotel motel tax, and a rental car fee. The remaining money going towards stadium debt does come from the general fund, and this year we expect to pay from that fund $6.4 million for debt service, $1.2 million for capital maintenance, and around $1 million more for police, traffic, and insurance. That accounts for about 2% of the general fund budget, and since the other buckets are filling up faster than predicted and the area around the stadium is attracting more development than expected, the county hopes on chipping away at the general fund obligation over the coming years. And finally, for reasons that have been discussed prior, Cobb County has managed to keep its millage rate well below our metro neighbors that have a similar population, all the while providing similar, if not superior, services. And if you live in unincorporated Cobb, you pay far less than your neighbors who live in one of the county's 6 cities. This is a comparison with school taxes included. At the same time, the population of Cobb County continues to grow, putting more pressure on county departments to serve the growing population.
Hopefully that will have explained a lot of the complexity of this tax bill. And with me today, I've got Steve White from the tax assessor's office, and a little bit later here in this video, he's going to actually give you a more detailed explanation about how to read your tax bill with regard to the millage rates that's applied against your general fund. Because as we all know, the tax bill is broken down into 4 parts, and there's a lot of confusion about what part of that tax bill actually is associated with the millage rate that I'm asking for here, which if you use that number against the wrong number, it creates a bigger number, which is not in fact accurate to reflect what you're really paying out to pay for the general fund, which pays for the services in this county. So let's get started. We knew about this hole that I've been talking about since Christmas, this $30 million, 1.1 mil hole. We've known about it for roughly 4 years. And it isn't that we were adding things into our budget that made the hole. It was actually we were having to pay more for items that were already in our budget to maintain the same level of service that you have been experiencing over the last 4 or 5 years. And I want to be very clear about this. This budget I'm proposing begins a journey for restoration back to a service level that you all had before the recession started. But the $30 million does nothing more than cover added expenses that are part of the budget. And for example, just like you in your home, you have to pay more for healthcare costs. I have to pay more for healthcare costs for our county employees. And that doesn't matter whether they work for the county or for the elected officials like the sheriff or the judges or any other elected office, like, or in the case of Steve here, he's an independent office. We pay for all the compensation for everyone that works for the county or is connected with the county. We also have a contribution, mandatory contribution to the pension fund. For a number of years, we did this practice of basically refinancing our pension fund, so we never developed any equity in it, which allowed us to decrease the amount that we needed to pay to make the pension fund whole. So we're roughly right now at about 52%. We're working our way towards 100%, and the reason it's going to take so long is because pension fund obviously is a large sum of money, and we need to eat into this apple a little bit at a time. And our raters in New York have us on a basically a mortgage program, if you want to have some sort of a comparison, where every year we pay a certain amount of money to get towards that goal of having a pension fund that's completely 100% funded. And we're still a number of years away from that, but increased pension costs this year, about $7.5 million. So that's another, between the healthcare costs and the pension fund costs, it's about $15 million of that whole. Last year, board passed a pay study, and that was not a pay raise for employees. It was simply a measure to bring about 45% of our county employees, regardless of where they worked, up to a mid-market range so that we could be competitive with the business world. Just like anybody else, we try to get the best, but we have to pay a salary that's going to attract them and, more importantly, keep them here. So last year, the board passed this pay study, and that added about $11 million annually to our budget. So again, you can see $8 million for healthcare costs, $7 million for pension costs, $11 million for the pay study. We're very close to $30 million. And like I said, we've known about these costs for a number of years, and we didn't budget for them appropriately. And that's all I'm going to say about that matter. I'm dealing with the reality, and that tomorrow I don't worry about what happened in the past. But the 1.1 million mil that I'm asking for, $30 million, that only maintains the services that we've had over the last 7 or 8 years. It does not add any positions. It doesn't address recapitalization, which is a fancy word for saying I need to buy new vehicles. It doesn't address other known material shortfalls that we have to start replacing. The reality is, ladies and gentlemen, just like you and me, we have cars that need to be replaced. We have equipment that needs to be replaced. And what I'm trying to do with this millage rate is to start replacing that equipment in addition to what we've been doing just to maintain a certain level of service. So if you look at this chart here, we're talking about the millage rate starting about 1990 to where we are today. And as you see on the chart, if I could borrow your pointer there for a second, Steve, thank you. Back in the early days of the late days of the 20th century, we were at about 12.22 mils, and we slowly brought that millage rate down to roughly a little over 9.97. And we did that by the major way we did that was by borrowing money from the water fund. It's about $20 million a year. So we transferred money out of the water fund to the general fund, which allowed us to pay for things other than using the millage rate. And then during the golden years under Chairman Olins, we kept the millage rate at a relatively low amount of 9.72 for about 6 years. Towards the end of his administration, we actually lowered it down to about 9.6 mils. And we did that by starting a practice of using SPLOST funds to pay for things that we used to pay for out of the general fund. Paving the roads, buying cars, buying equipment. So that allowed us to reduce our millage rate even lower. And then 2011, when the hammer dropped, and that's called the recession. And in 2011, we raised our millage rate by 1.5 mils, 1.51 mils actually, to compensate for two things. One of them is, which is a condition that I'm in right now, is that we ran out of fund balance. In other words, extra money that was brought in because the economy was better or we didn't have to pay more for a certain project, we did achieve some savings. And you can use those savings to offset the millage rate. But by the end of 2010, we'd run out of that luxury. And we had to raise the millage rate to offset the fact that we no longer had fund balance, money laying around, and then to compensate for the decrease in the tax digest caused by the recession. So we went back up to 1.11 mils, and then over time, slowly brought those numbers down by again using a technique of using SPLOST dollars to buy even more things that we used to pay for out of the general fund. So my argument has always been that 9.85 mils is really an artificially low rate. It doesn't reflect the same practices in 2017 that we did in 1990 when we used all general fund dollars to pay for everything, such as paving of the roads and buying all our equipment. So what I'm trying to do is get back to a level during the early part of this century, a millage rate that will be sustainable, where I don't have to come back every year and ask for more to buy things. I want to set that rate, and I believe that if I add 1.7 mils to this millage rate, it will achieve that purpose. And my goal is that next year at this time, we will not be having this discussion because I've generated enough revenue to continue to sustain all programs into future years. Here are some of the known expenses that I was talking about. I'll just let you take a look at them. I've spoken about some of them already with the healthcare costs and the pension fund. I also spoke about the pay and class study. But as you know, we've hired more police officers. We've had to do some incentivizing to keep our police officers here and our sheriff. And this thing called the unified court system. We have a very antiquated system, and the danger there is that the information is not keeping up with our ability of our police officers to, when they stop you, they do a road stop or some other stop for whatever reason. If they go into their laptop in the car and they see that your warrant that was dismissed by the judge has not entered their data, then they are going to arrest you for an open warrant, when in fact, the database, because our unified court system software is so antiquated, it can't keep the pace and can't stay connected to what we're having with the law enforcers out here. And you and I both know that it doesn't take very many 1 million lawsuits for false arrest to achieve our goal. So the unified court system, we're not going to be buying that all in 1 year. We're going to spread those costs out over 3 or 4 years. But nonetheless, it's a good $3 or $4 million that adds to something that we know we had to buy, and now is the time that's going to have to buy that. People ask us all the time, well, what have you done to find savings and efficiencies? And ladies and gentlemen, I just want you to take a look at this chart. There are a lot of things we have done in the past to keep this millage rate low, but they've been at a consequence to you as the public. Obviously, the top one, we mentioned that very early. We have vehicles that are very, very old, and they're reaching the point of them being unsafe. We have to replace them. It's not a matter of fixing them. They just simply do not meet the standards of today for safety. And over time, that has added up to $100 million. So we've deferred buying things over the last few years, and that adds to $100 million in savings, or cost avoidance, whatever you want to talk about. Savings is actually if you buy a car less than what you thought it was going to cost. But a cost avoidance is we have just simply not spent that money. And to me, whatever you want to call it, that's been a way where we have not put that on your tax bill. In the old days, every commissioner had a team of people that they used for cutting the right-of-way medians and for fixing potholes. And at one time, that was 4 teams. We're down to 1 team now for the whole county. So when we talk about a backlog of a couple thousand work requests, that's exactly what we're talking about here. So when you talk about that your medians have not been cut, well, there's the answer why. We simply didn't budget for that, and that was a cost deferral or cost avoidance so that we wouldn't have to pay a more bill. But just go down this list, take a look at it. I'll be quiet here for a few minutes. They pretty much speak for themselves. All right, we've also sold properties. Not a lot. We don't try to buy more properties than we actually need, but over time we replace some of them. As you know, we're consolidating 2 libraries this year by building a new library in Kennesaw. And so those buildings become available, and as they become available, Sometimes we lease them out to other organizations, and that brings some income, but we also go to sell properties, and right now we've made almost $5 million by selling properties over the last few years. Now, in October, the board got together, and we've divided the world up into 3 categories: mandated, essential, and desired. And I'm just going to give you an idea of each one of those categories are. Mandated are those programs that the state or the federal government says that we have to have in the county to help operate, to run this county. And these are some of those critical items right here. So I'm going to let you take a look at those for a second. Okay, so you can see on here, these are some of the programs, offices that are required by law. Some of them should not be a surprise to you. Obviously, the sheriff department and the judges. But this is about out of our $403 million budget. This is about $170 million of that. So that's a big chunk of money that I have almost no discretion over cutting or raising. Obviously, anyone out here would take more money, but there's no savings in this one. The next department is called essential. This is one where these are functions of government that are not required by law, but we as a board have deemed essential to the delivery of services to this county. And I think one of the things I'd like to point out here is that there's a lot of people who think that the police department is mandated by law, when in fact we're only one of 9 counties in Georgia that has a police department. But we believe that police department is essential to delivering public safety to this county in conjunction with the sheriff. Now, the $70 million for the police department, $70 million for the sheriff department, and then probably another $30 or $40 million for the judges. When we talk about public safety as number one priority, we believe we live up to that promise. Almost half of our budget goes to programs involving public safety in this county. And as we all know, not only we believe that our public safety, our police department is the finest in Georgia, but it requires a significant amount of resources to make sure they're properly led, trained, and equipped. There is a zero tolerance policy apparently in America today for police making mistakes. So we have to make sure that before we turn them loose on the street, and as you know, our police drive around the cars by themselves, we have to make sure they got the right level of training to make sure they can do their job and do it in a manner that reflects the society and the standards that we set in our society. But again, take a look at these lists on here, programs on here. Again, these are essential, they're not mandated, but can you imagine this county being without all these programs here? Code enforcement, 800 megahertz, I could go down the list. Every one of these is a reasonable program that makes sure that when you pick up the phone and call somebody, somebody answers the phone and then more importantly, responds to your concern. Finally, we have the desired column. And the reason this column is so important, which is about $80 million out of our budget, is this is where all the voters are. When we see in the newspaper that we want to close something to save money, it comes from this part of the pie right here. And this is the one that generates all the emails to the commissioners. The libraries, the parks, the senior centers, every one of these things on here has their own constituents for the most part. And this is the one where it is my contention that there are no savings from this part of the pie. These are services that we have been delivering, although at a reduced level of support for the last 6 or 7 years. And this is the level of services that I believe we need to bring back to a level that we had before the recession started. What I hear from the voters, both on email and other means of social media, is they like these services and they want to retain them. And they've asked us not to produce a millage rate that does that. And my budget does exactly that. My 1.7 mils keeps every one of these services on this part of the pie and the other 2 parts of the pie not only open, but if we get the additional millage rate, starts to return them to a level of service that you used to have before the recession. Now, people ask me about the Braves. And I think this is time where we just need to have a really serious conversation. and then just speak to the facts. We all know that I campaigned on a platform of, if we can vote for a parks bond, why can't we vote for a baseball bond? It was never about the Braves. It was always about the process, is that how do we spend our money and the right of the public to have a voice in spending their money. I thought that a $350 million bond certainly deserving of a referendum, and I ran in that campaign and I won on it because that was the issue at the door. But somehow people have confused that campaign and transformed it into a belief that I was campaigning against the Braves. That's just simply not true, because I recognize that the Braves and the associated battery was a business opportunity for this county to build on the future. Not only did it bring people together in probably the most popular area of America called sports, but it was also over time going to bring in revenue. And that's the question I get right now. So I'm only going to address that part of our partnership to the Braves, which I have steadfastly supported and lived up to the commitments that we were agreed to under a contract back in 2014 and 15. I've lived up to both the spirit and intent of those contracts. I believe that is my responsibility to do that as a leader of this board. That sends a message out just not only to the business community, but everybody as a whole, that this is a county that stands by its word. We do not try to finesse our word. That stands solidly, and when we say something, we mean it, and we're going to deliver on it. We have every year we have an $8.6 million commitment to this partnership with the Braves. And right now, the Braves and the associated development around the Braves is bringing in about $3 million. Right, so we've taken that $8.6 million financial annual commitment and brought it down to the level of about $5 to $5.5 million every year. That's right now, and that's after the Braves have only been open for not even quite 2 years. We need to have $2.4 billion in development for us to generate the $8.6 million in taxes that will make our commitment a wash. In other words, we will bring in as much revenue as we need to pay for our commitment to the Braves partnership without asking the taxpayer to open up their wallet to make up for the shortfall. And right now, we're still about $5 million short of that. So I want to be very open about that. We are using taxpayers' money to pay for the general fund part of the bond to live up to that commitment. I want to, SPLOST is a separate issue. We can't use SPLOST dollars to help pay for general fund products. But the good news is that we are on a solid path towards getting to that $8.6 million. As you know, we've had a number of developments that have opened in the last year. The battery is well on its way to being built out. The Omni Hotel opened up last year. The Synovus headquarters, HD Supply, Encore Apartments, and I could go down the list. As you saw in the newspaper here recently, a company is going to bring a development to the Cumberland CID that's going to bring in about $260 million in development. That's 1/10 of the goal that I need to get $2.4 billion. So I firmly believe that what the Braves have done down there is going to bring in the $2.4 million. And sometime in the future, I don't know when yet, because I can't predict when developments are going to happen, but sometime in the future, we're going to get to that $8.6 million that we need to make sure that the taxpayer no longer has to open up his wallet to pay for the Braves. The good news on the SPLOST side of the equation is that it's bringing in more revenue than projected. And of course, that's great for us because we use SPLOST dollars to pave our roads, buy vehicles and new equipment, and of course, new buildings like, for instance, the new libraries, the new health centers that we're building. And the Braves and the developments down there are a big part of helping us to bring in the revenue to pay for those things. So the bottom line is, let's just separate, our frustration, which I know is real and palatable, and I appreciate that. I know where that comes from because I campaigned on it. But I also want to say that we are moving in a direction that will one day alleviate your concern that we were using our dollars to pay for a sports stadium. As a business decision was made, and for me, my job is to live up to the commitments made when we sign contracts, and that's what I plan to do in the future, while also working to encourage businesses to come to the Cumberland CID area and also the parts of the county so that we can get to that $8.6 million in revenue that we're going to need so that we no longer have to have this discussion. Now, what is the $1.7 million going to buy? 1.7 mil is going to buy. Well, 1.1 mil of that, or $30 million, is going to pay for the existing services that we have, right? And the new costs associated with that, like I mentioned earlier, healthcare costs and the pension fund. But there's another 0.6 mil in there, and that's to start restoring services that you received before the recession. The recession is over. America is back at full tilt, and I believe that now is the opportunity that we've waited long enough that we need to restore this county back to the level of public services that we had before the recession. And it was the kind of level of services that made this the choice destination in the metro area. We talk about public safety being our #1 priority, and I've mentioned earlier, we have certainly lived up to that, but there are other commitments that we need to do given the delay or the deferral of services. One of them, of course, we need to bring more police officers into the force. There's no such thing as trying to find a more efficient way of handling a population that has grown from 450,000 people to 740,000 people in the last 30 years. You cannot take care of public safety without adding more police officers. And the 23 police officers that I've put on the budget here are to address the increasing population and the challenges that come with them. It also goes to buy body cameras. We need to make sure that every police officer and deputy sheriff here has a police officer, has a body camera. That's both to protect the police officer and to the public. As I mentioned earlier, the police are under intense scrutiny now, and these body cameras are our best evidence to protect both the public and the police officers when we have an incident that might be of question. And there's other issues in there. Animal services. I simply ask you, we have 8,000 or 9,000 dogs and cats delivered to animal services every year. And if we did not have animal services, where do you think those dogs and cats would go? They would drop them off at the river somewhere. This is an essential service to make sure that we don't turn this into a prairie land for dogs and cats because people have nowhere to take their cats or dogs to be handled. And I want to say that when they're brought to this facility, we work intensely to find homes for them elsewhere. That means out of the state as well as in state. So this is not a place for them to come to find their final resting place. This is just simply more a transition home for them where we can find them another home somewhere else. Department of Transportation. This is where we're going to finally bring back the teams that take care of the grass and the potholes. As we saw during the recession, the grass did not take a break during the recession. They came back, but we need to restore those 4 teams so that you can start knowing that you can drive down the median here and safely look across, walk across, or back across somewhere without having to worry about the fact that you can't see the traffic. Libraries. I'm putting $800,000 back into the libraries every year until we're fully restored to all libraries back to the full operating hours. Just a 3-year program to do that. Now, I've also made a commitment to the commissioners that we're going to bring back the library study. We have to once and for all decide if we're going to consolidate libraries or make some other adjustments or leave them alone. I do not want to have this discussion every single year about a story that we're closing libraries. I want to make it very clear that I in no way, shape, or form have any desire to close a library, but I also realize is that as people move around the counties, there are libraries that are not getting the use they used to, so perhaps a consolidation effort is something that we need to consider. But I'm going to have the board engaged in this next year, and at the next year when I bring the budget back here, this $800,000, which will also be in the budget for the following year, will go to address libraries that for sure we're going to maintain into the future without having to have a rediscussion every year. There are other expenses on here, and I just want you to take a look at those to get some idea of what it is that you're going to be getting for an additional 1.7, an additional 0.6 mils above and beyond the 1.1 mils that I've been asking for since Christmas time. And this additional 0.6 mils are programs that your commissioners brought to me that I thought should be included in the budget so we can start to get back on our journey to restoration of county services. Okay, what I'd like to do now is turn the platform over to Stephen White, and I think this is, of all the charts on this presentation, This one and the one that followed this, I think if you get nothing else out of that, these are the charts that you need to focus on, because this explains exactly what it is that it's going to be costing you, and more importantly, how that cost is determined. So please pay very close attention to what Steve tells you here about how to look at your tax form and how the assessments are derived and how the millage rate is going to be applied. With that, Steve, I'll turn the pointer over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate it. What we've done, Chairman, is we've taken a property and we broke down the tax bill so that you can see how the property is valued and how it translates over to the tax bill, and really how the homestead float works. So this is a property that was purchased in 2004, and of course everything in the property tax industry is based on the status of the property on January 1. So the first year that they owned the property, 2005, the Board of Tax Assessors had a value of $468,590. Now the assessed value is nothing but 40% of that number, and that's on the estimate that's on the assessment notice that we mail out in the spring. As you come across taxable value, you notice is considerably less. The taxable value is the actual value.
Got a longer arm than you do, Steve. I'll help you out here.
Thank you.
There's a taxable
value. That's considerably less. That's because that's the assessed value from the prior year.
Right.
So the law that went into effect in 2001, the Homestead Float Law, said you go back to the year before the first year of Homestead.
Before
so
that,
back to
before that value.
Before that value, right. So we go back to what was the assessed value in 2004. It was $137,684. That now becomes the fixed value for that property, as long as that person owns the home.
I think it's important to emphasize fixed value.
Yeah, fixed value.
Right.
Now, for technicality purposes, if somebody were to add a swimming pool down the line, we just add the contributory value of that. So there would be a way that value might change if somebody were to do something to their property. But nonetheless, you see an exemptions amount here of $49,000. That's nothing more than the difference between those two numbers right there.
Subtract this from this, and you get $49,752.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, in 2005, the millage rate on the general fund was 6.85. There's the calculation. And you notice that the value, or excuse me, that the amount due on that portion of the tax bill, $943. Now, we have the other portions of the tax bill. In 2005, you have the county bond, county fire, county school. There is no, and the state, there is no float program for any of those lines.
Right.
So you have a $10,000 exemption amount for the school, and at the time, in 2005, there was a levy for the state. And so the total tax bill was $4,800 in 2005.
But out of that, the general fund tax was only $943.
Right. Majority of that is the school portion, as was mentioned at the beginning of your program.
Because that's taxed against the full assessed value of the home. 187 minus the homestead exemption. So the school tax at that time was
$3,300, which the millage rate is 19.
Right.
19. So that's a majority of the bill there.
All right.
Now, as we move ahead to 2017, that property, the Board of Tax Assessors have a value of $655,000 on that. So the 40% number is $262,000. But you'll notice that the taxable value has not changed since they purchased the home 2005, their very first year that they had the property. Right. It's the same.
Right.
The exemption amount has gone up because that's the difference of those two numbers. So $124,000 is the difference between those two numbers there. And of course, our millage rate last year was $676. So if you notice that $930, so this person paid less in 2017 to the general fund than they did in 2005. Right. The other amounts are appropriately associated with the applicable millage rate for 2017. And we have 0 for the state because that still shows on the tax bill. However, the state does not have a millage rate any longer. So the total bill was $6,500 last year, but they actually were paying less to the county and the general fund.
Yeah, and that goes to the narrative you hear from a lot of people that say, well, I paid more taxes last year. Mm-hmm. Yes, you did. Yeah. But you didn't pay more taxes for the general fund part. You paid more taxes against the other 3 parts of your tax bill.
Correct. Correct.
Because again, the fire fund, the county bond, and the Cobb school, those get no exemptions.
That's correct.
For the most part.
And so if we were to roll this ahead to 2028, Chairman, if let's just say for argument's sake that we had another $200,000 on it. Now the property was $855,000. One thing is for sure, that taxable value would still be $137,000.
And if the millage rate was the same, you'd still only pay $930.
That's right.
And so again, the only way that you're going to be paying more or less for in your taxes for the general fund part of your taxes is if the millage rate goes up or down.
That's right.
It has nothing to do with the assessed value of your home.
That's right.
Yeah, and I think that's the key to understanding here, and that's what Gabriel gives the pause that how is it I can pay more but I pay less?
Right.
All right. Well, you pay more because the other three parts of your tax bill, that's where the increase comes from.
Yep. And for technicality purposes, the bond was even lower last in 2017 and then in 05. So
yeah, that's a great point.
And we have had a team of employees at the town hall meetings, and we will continue to do so. So if folks want to know what their taxable value is, they can come by our office, they can give us a call, they can go to our website, cobbassessor.org, or they can come and visit us at one of the town hall meetings. We've got some folks that are working those. Special room off to the side. We'll be happy to look up what yours was based on the assessment notice for 2018, and you can compare it to the 1.7 mils to see exactly what the increase would be for the general fund.
Yeah, I remember one of the town halls this week, a lady took advantage of your offer to have her look at her tax bill, and she walked in saying, yeah, he was right, they are lower. So again, that's a great opportunity. Again, if you come to a town hall, please go to the afterwards or beforehand, stop by the tax assessor's table and have them call up your tax bill and have them show you exactly that what we've been saying for a long time now is that the true tax issue for the tax bill is not the general fund value. It has been the other areas, which, don't get me wrong, they're worth the value, all right? No, I personally wouldn't argue with the school tax, although I do have, I'm exempt from it now, so I really like it that I'm exempt. But the bottom line is schools are one of the critical elements for any civilized society, and we got to pay what it's taken to make sure our schools deliver the right product. So what does this all mean? And this is the chart this is the second most important chart in the presentation, and maybe the one that gets you the interest most. This is what you're going to pay, all right, for a 1.7 mil increase. And remember, I want to go back to the chart before. That value is assessed against the taxable value of your home. That's what the 1.7 mil increase is going to be taxed against. So my increase is going to take us up to about 8.83 mils, which is still 2 mils less than anybody else in the county overall. Two mils less than any other comparable county in the metro area. But that taxable value, this is what you'll be paying for on an annual basis. And then the second column, under monthly costs, we're paying for on a monthly basis. So take a look at your number. If you don't know your number for your taxable general fund, go back to your tax bill and take a look at that number on there. All right?
Chairman, if I could just add.
Absolutely.
The best way to do this at this time would be to go to our website if they wanted to do it on their own, and do exactly what we do at your town halls, bring up the assessment notice.
Right.
Because the tax commissioner, Carla Jackson, will be mailing bills in August, but you can still see on the estimator, on the assessment notice that we mail out in the spring, just look for taxable value on a copy of the assessment notice that's located on their property on the assessor's website.
And what's that website again?
Cobbassessor.org.
Okay, cobbassessor.org, go to that, and then compare that number with that. So the bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, that what I'm asking for is to not only retain and not only to fully fund existing services, but to finally put meat back onto those services so that we can get back to a standard that we had before the recession, which I'm fully confident that the voters want, because they want to live in a place where you can safely work, live, play, and pursue your dreams. With that, like I always say in all my emails, it's your government, stay involved. Go to cobbcounty.org for other presentations about the budget. And as always, look forward to hearing from you by email, on Facebook, or on Twitter. So thanks for coming today, Steve.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll see you at the town halls.
All right, sounds good.